I'm prepared to leave even the sponsored car and then get to the public transport, as long as if our ministers can be able to lead us by example. I don't have a problem for that.
The pushback to Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's reforms. He wants municipal officials to use public transport and rein in their expenses. He's slashed their budget for vehicles, travel and entertainment. Is it fair to expect mayors to use public transport, and why are provincial and national government not included here? We speak to Mohammed Lohad from the South African Local Government Association in our Johannesburg studio, and Hanif Huston, the DA's Shadow Minister for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, is on the line from Cape Town. Gentlemen, very warm welcome. Mohammed, what's your response to this? How's it going to work?
So, from a SAGA perspective, I think our viewpoint with regards to these cost containment regulations is we support the spirit of what he's trying to do, but we feel some of the actual details in the actual regulation is not going to be practical, to be very honest. So one of the things we need to consider is that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So if you look at, for example, the metros, like your city of Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, etc., yes, public transport could be a viable option if you're getting from meeting to meeting, etc., etc. It's fine. If you go to another province, for example, like the Northern Cape, where the distances are very vast, and because we know that also public transport isn't always reliable as well, you're going to be probably asking for some difficulties if you're going to ask political office bearers to use public transport to get to meetings and to be that mode of transport to get from place to place.
It's a difficult balance, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, if you leave room to manoeuvre, I should imagine there'll be lots of manoeuvring in there.
That is true on the one side, but I think you also got to put some context into the whole matter as well. So one of the things that from a SAGA perspective, we've done a little bit of analysis with regards to these cost containment regulations. And what's interesting for us to note is that we understand it's taxpayers' money, and we understand that we've got to be prudent in terms of how we spend it as well as local government. But remember, what's good for one sphere of government has to be also good for the other spheres of government as well. And also what's very interesting is when the Minister of Finance does his budget allocations, which he did earlier this year in terms of the budget speech, only 9.5% of money came through to local government. The remaining balance went through to the other two spheres of government. So 90% plus is sitting in other spheres of government. But there's a big focus put onto the local government sphere. So obviously, we're saying that we understand where it's coming from. We understand that municipalities are also in financial distress, many of them. But we're saying that what's good for the goose should be good for the gander as well. So it should be applicable to the rest of the public sector as well.
And Hanif Huston, what are your thoughts about this?
I think the comments from SAGA is just an indication of the deep-rooted problems that we have in South Africa. You see, the problem that we have, Jane, is that I think SAGA themselves should have been taking the lead on cost containment measures in South Africa and should be doing everything humanly possible to make sure that our elected representatives and mayors and cities are actually using the public money for the benefit of the people and not for their own benefit. I see no reason why public transport is not possible for them to use. I mean, to give you one such example, a mayor traveling from another city into Johannesburg can use the Gauteng quite easily to get to Sandton and many other places.
And I guess as well, if it's not good enough for a mayor, I mean, why should the public be subjected to it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's very possible for elected public representatives to use public transport. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I think, Jane, there's been a lot of focus on this whole issue around public transport, but the reality is that the regulations itself does not entirely do away with mayors purchasing vehicles. It still provides for mayors to purchase vehicles up to 700,000 rand. The problem that we have,
70% of their salary, right?
Yeah, or 70% of their salary, whichever is the lower. But essentially, it comes down to 700,000 rand because the lowest paid mayor is in the region of about 700,000 rand anyway. So most mayors are still going to be using public transport, private vehicles for many years to come. And I wait to see the day that we wake up in one morning and actually see any of our mayors taking public transport. I can't see that happening in the near future. So although I think that the intention of the regulation is very good, there are many laws in our country that have been written and many regulations that have been written for many years, which are all very good. The problem is going to be in the implementation, and I'd really like to see how the Minister of Cocta and the Minister of Finance themselves are going to implement this and hold those mayors accountable, especially since they say that these regulations say that you can be held criminally liable or for financial misconduct.
Okay, Mr. Lockhart, I mean, do you have any idea how they will implement it and
So effectively,
how you keep on top of it?
Yeah. So from what we understand, the regulations come into effect on the 1st of July this year. So obviously, that is the new financial year for the municipalities as well. So I think it's just a matter of making sure, and by the way, it doesn't only apply to mayors, it applies to all political office bearers and officials as well, who've got to use, and that's just one element of the regulations being the public transport element. There's also a number of other things, the use of consultants, the issue of not using credit cards, etc., which I think, in terms of the spirit of what's trying to be proposed here, from a SAGA perspective, we fully support it. We understand why it is there, and we understand also the intent behind it as well. So, as the other speaker was mentioning, the issue we have in the South African context in many cases is we've got very, very good laws, but implementation generally does sometimes pose to be a problem. So I think in terms of these things, it'll just be for the actual municipalities themselves to ensure that they actually do apply what needs to be done here. And obviously, where it will come out if it's not being done is when they get audited by the Auditor General, there may be certain non-compliance matters that are picked up, and that's where it may come through in terms of that. But from our side, we're saying that, yes, we understand where it's coming from. SALGA itself, by the way, has taken, we're trying to walk the talk. So internally, in terms of SALGA perspectives, we follow the cost containment regulations very, very closely. So we also try to make sure that when it comes to issues of catering and transport, etc., we try to limit what we have to do in terms of those regulations itself. So
and Hanif, I mean, picking up that point about consultants, I mean, I was quite shocked at how much money is wasted on consultants. I mean, does that show that there is the lack of expertise in those departments as well, possibly?
I think there are more often than not, municipalities sometimes pretend that there is a lack of expertise rather than looking internally, so that it creates an opportunity for some of our politicians to be able to route money through third forces. I mean, there's been a number of articles and books written about these circumstances, and it all comes down to walking the talk and implementing the laws, Jane. For as long as we don't have these good regulations and good laws not being implemented, the problem will continue. And, the Municipal Finance Management Act, for example, has been implemented many years ago, and it talks almost exactly to the same spirit of these regulations, that municipalities must spend their money in a very efficient manner. And every day we open the newspapers and we read about municipalities wasting people's money. But not a single one of these politicians are sitting in jail up until today. So it's going to come down to implementing the law, and we're going to offer both Ministers of Finance and COGTA help in this regard. We'll make sure that every one of our DA councillors in all the municipalities know what these regulations are about and hold those elected public representatives accountable and report any transgressions to these ministers so that we can test whether or not they themselves are going to implement the very regulations that they have written.
All right, because Mohammed, I mean, very briefly, clearly, we will all benefit if this is done correctly.
We will benefit. And again, I think the one message we want to get across is we feel that we support it in the spirit, as I mentioned, but it needs to be applied consistently, and there needs to be a balanced approach. So I'm saying when I say consistently, we are one state. So I hear what the other speaker is mentioning as well, but obviously we need to also consider that there are similar transgressions that take place in the other spheres of government as well. So what applies to local government should also apply to the other spheres of government as well. And at the end of the day, what's very important is we need to understand that we need to get local government working, because local government is the closest to the community. Service delivery happens at this level as well. So if local government works, then the citizens benefit ultimately.
It would be lovely to lead by example. Mohammed Lockhart and Hanif Hussain, thank you very much. That's our show for tonight. Checkpoint is up next, and I'll be back with your news bulletin at 9 o'clock.